Hi class. Now that we have our clay wedged, we are going to start trying to throw a cylinder. Cylinder looks something like this. We're going to go for straight walls with even thickness on the walls and the bottom. Main tools that I will need for this are my metal rib, my wooden knife, and my needle tool and sponge. You probably just want to bring your whole toolkit with you to the wheel to keep everything together. I also like to have a hand towel over my leg to protect it and also to wipe my hands off. If your wheel has bat pins in it, you're either going to need to unscrew them from the bottom or you can use a bat. I'm going to get my ball of clay, and you want to remember, start with one about the size of your fist. It's just an easy size to work with. And I'm going to try to make it kind of perfectly rounded on the top. It can be flat on the bottom, but a perfect mound. No sides kind of like poking out more than others. The first step is called centering, and this is where we get all of the clay perfectly symmetrical. So if it starts off that way, it's usually easier to do the centering. And I throw it down onto the bat. And I want to get a good stick on there. And I try to make it look like it's on the center of the bat. Okay, then I'm going to wet both my hands, wet the clay. And what I like to do is use this part of my hand. I'm going to set it flush to the wheel head, and I'm going to put my thumb across the middle. It's important that your thumb is laying across at 5 o'clock if you were looking at your ball of clay as a clock. So the 5 would be right here. So I'm going to kind of use my fingertips. You can see on my hand where the clay is hitting. My fingertips around here. And I'm going to kind of squeeze that ball of clay, keeping my thumb across the middle. Now with this amount of clay, I could probably do this one-handed, but you're going to want to support your other hand by pushing down on the top of the thumb and squeezing in the sides with your non-dominant hand. I also have my elbows locked into my knees in a comfortable position. This way I can use my whole body to lean forward rather than just the strength of my arms. Okay, I'm going to turn my wheel up to full speed, and I'm going to squeeze in, pushing force down on the top and force in on the sides. Those two forces combined will center the clay. You can see there's a little bit of a wobble to it right now. That means it's not centered. So force down on the top and the clay flows out. You can see it getting wider. Force in on the sides and the clay goes up. And you can see it getting taller. And when we use those two forces together, that will center the clay. And I'm just constantly re-moistening my hands. This will probably be a very difficult task for you to do. Don't be surprised if this is the only thing you can accomplish today. And you may not even accomplish it today. It takes people a long time to learn to center, so don't feel discouraged if you don't get it your first try. Okay, now you can see there's no wobble to my clay. The next step is called welling. So I'm going to take my two fingers like this. I'm going to hold them sort of at an angle towards the center. I don't want them to be off center. You can see here they're kind of like wiggling around. I want them to find their natural resting place where they don't wiggle. And that's where I'm going to start to push down. As soon as I get a little depression in my clay, I'm going to fill it up with water. It's called a well. Oop, there's a little glaze in my sponge. Okay, we got to keep that well filled with water. We're going to press down until we think we're about 1/4 of the way from the bottom, 1/4 of an inch, or maybe 1/2 of an inch if you want to be on the safe side. Now that's going to probably be hard for you to tell as you first begin. So the way that you can tell for sure is stop your wheel, take your needle tool, and just poke it in the bottom. Then I put my fingertip right at the edge, and I pull it out, and I can see this much of my needle went down into the clay. So that's perfect. I don't want it to get any thinner than that. Now I'm going to open my well by pulling my fingers forward. And I need to do this slowly so that I don't pull my opening off center. We never really want to open our pots up wider than the outside edge. Okay, now I'm going to use my sponge to compress the bottom. If we don't do this, sometimes we end up getting cracks in the bottom. So all I'm doing is just pushing down on that clay, kind of compacting it. We call it compressing. Okay, and I just did the same thing to the rim where I kind of held the two sides and pushed down with my fingertip. Kind of make that rim nice and compressed as well. Now I'm ready to do the next step, which is pulling. So with this step, I'm going to take my 2 fingers on the inside and 2 fingers on the outside, and I'm going to slowly let that clay flow through those fingertips like a ribbon and pull up the walls. So at first, I'm going to put a lot of pressure to move all of this thick clay off the bottom, but as I lift up, I'm going to lighten my pressure. I like to hold a sponge on my outside hand. That's just how I learned how to throw. However you want to do it is up to you. I also want to keep my 2 fingers connected, and remember my elbows are always anchored into my knees. I'm going to slow my wheel down to about medium speed for this. Slowly lightening my pressure just a bit as I move that clay upward, and I'm going to go all the way past the rim and let my hands ease away. I never want to jerk my hands away from the wheel really fast because that can throw my fingers off center, or my clay off center. Okay, I'm going to do one more pull. I'm going to start at the bottom and start lifting that clay up, letting it flow through my fingertips. As I get towards the top, I lighten my pressure just a bit. Go all the way to the top, and then ease away. Compress my rim just a bit. And I'm going to compress the bottom again. There is also a lot of water in the bottom of my cup, which I'm sopping up with the sponge. I don't want to leave that water in the bottom of my cup. Okay, I can do this in pretty much 2 pulls. Maybe I'll try to do one more pull to thin out the bottom a little bit more. It may take you more than 2 or 3 pulls to do your cylinder, depending on how much clay you're moving. Now what happens is it's always really hard to get this last little bit of clay that you can see kind of flaring out at the bottom. So that's where our wooden knife comes in. I'm going to hold my wooden knife just like I would hold a pencil. And I'm going to put the long sharp side against the pot. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go straight down and cut through that little triangle of clay that sticks out on the side that's making this not a perfect cylinder. I hold the back part with my non-dominant hand just to kind of support so it doesn't wiggle as I'm doing this. So 2 hands, elbows in the knees. This side's flush to the wheel. And I'm just going to go straight down into that. Now I have this little excess of scrap clay here. I'm going to take my needle tool, slide it underneath there to cut it off of the wheel. Make a little cut and take that off. Now, if you think that your pot isn't quite cylinder, you can see it has a little bit of shape to it, and I want it to be perfectly straight, I'm going to take my metal rib, I'm going to hold it at an angle to the side of the pot, and I'm just going to run my finger against the inside and against that straight edge on the outside to shape this into a nice straight edge. I'm also going to remove this excess slip off of the clay. The clay is really wet because I've been adding water to it this whole time, but now to help it with drying and to compress those sides, I'm going to scrape that excess off of the pot. It removes the throwing rings for a nice clean look, and it also will make it possible for me to pick this off of the pot or off of the wheel at the end without marring the surface. Okay, one last step before I cut this off the wheel. As you can see right now, it looks like the pot is growing out of the tabletop. It's like really stuck on there. We like to create a little bit of shadow underneath there for a visual effect, and as well as a place for us to end our glaze line. We kind of carve in a natural edge for our glaze to stop. And so I'm going to hold my wooden knife now flush to the wheel head, and I'm just going to run it underneath there just a little bit. You can see that little shadow happened right there. And I can carve any sort of shape that I want with my wooden knife, thinking about creating a little ledge for my glaze to stop later. It just gives it a more finished look. Okay, one more time getting that water out of the inside. I'm going to shape my rim just a little bit. One of my pottery teachers once told me that the best shaped rim looks like your fingertip. Straight on the outside and then curves down on the inside. So I'm going to make that rim. Just a little curve down inward. Okay, now I'm going to dry my hands off on my towel, my handy towel right on my leg. I'm going to take my wire cutter, wrap that around my finger so it's nice and tight. I'm going to hold that flush to the wheel head. And I'm just going to go straight across like that. I'm going to have a bat ready to go right next to me. And I want to make sure my hands are really nice and dry. I'm going to gently touch the sides of my pot. I'm not squeezing it at all, just barely touching it. But I'm going to twist and lift and set it down right on my bat to take back to my locker. You're going to want to bag your pots after you have them done. This is a little tricky since you don't want to disturb their shape or their surface too much, so you're going to just really carefully put that bag around the pot very gently so that it can start to set up until tomorrow. After you let your pot sit in the bag overnight, or maybe even a couple of days, depending on how wet it is outside and other factors, you're going to carefully unbag your pot. If it got a little bit messed up from the bag, then now's your chance to kind of clean that up a little bit. But mostly, we want to look at the bottom. You can see that the bottom of your pot has these lines from your wire tool. It probably has little sharp edges, and it should have that little bit of a bevel that you put in with your wooden knife. So what I'm going to do today is use my metal rib. And I'm just going to clean that off a little bit. I'm just going to smooth that bottom so that its bottom looks as smooth and even as the rest of the cup. Doesn't have those ridges on there. Okay, sometimes even just my finger is good. Now I've noticed that I've kind of messed up that beveled edge just a little bit too. So one trick that you can do is take your pot on a flat surface, hold it by its sides, and just kind of rock it all the way around on that edge, and that will put that bevel back in for you. Okay, so I'm going to look for any other little imperfections and smooth those out. I'm going to take my needle tool and I will put my name or initials, whatever you like to put, into your pots. Yeah, there's a little hair in there. It's not really a problem, that will just burn away. But don't forget your initials because everybody's cylinders will look an awful lot alike after they come out of the kiln. Then I might just take a look inside. I see a little imperfection there. It's a bit drier there, so maybe I'll just use my sponge to smooth that out. Just kind of touch it up. And once I think that it's all the way done, it's ready to go on the shelf to be bisked.